Hello and welcome to LFC Focus. It is pre-match build-up showtime with Liverpool taking on Wolverhampton Wanderers away from home at Molineux on Monday night in the FA Cup third round. And of course, the big argument everyone's having at the moment, the one we have this time every single year, is just how seriously Liverpool should be taking this competition. And of course, with the added pressure of a Premier League title race and coming off the back of that loss against Manchester City as well, I think the conversation is now more important than ever and it has become a lot more serious. And the reason that I think we should not be ignoring the FA Cup this season, despite the fact that you'd think this year more than any, there's a better reason to do so because the league campaign is so important right now. Whereas in the past, we've been at this stage in January where it's like, well, we're probably going to get top four, but we're not going to challenge for the league. And the Champions League is still a couple of months away. So we might as well at least give the FA Cup a shot. Whereas this time, it is kind of all hands on deck with the league campaign. However, I just think the Manchester City game has almost been a reminder that nothing can be taken for granted in the league. No matter how good Liverpool are, things could, and I'm not saying they will because I am, as always, an optimist, not a pessimist, but you've got to factor in the fact that things could always go horribly wrong. We could end up not winning the league and get knocked out of the Champions League by Bayern in the round of 16 or by yet another brilliant team in the quarterfinals because it's just that much of a difficult competition to win. We know how much effort Liverpool had to put in just to get into the final last year anyway. And this Liverpool team at the moment is so good. This Liverpool squad at the moment is so good. And the club is in such a fantastic moment right now that if it came out of this season without silverware, that would be, for me, an absolute travesty because at the end of the day, it's not all about silverware. I know that. It is about, getting results and challenging for the biggest trophies you possibly can and making memories through doing so. But you will still be judged on silverware. And for me, it's not even about how people judge Jurgen Klopp. I couldn't care less what people say about him having a final problem and not being able to win silverware and Liverpool being a bottling club or anything like that. But for me, I want to at least be able to look back on this Liverpool side and say that there was a trophy at the end of it to kind of act as a punctuation point, a full stop or a comma, whatever you want it to be, to actually highlight just how good this Liverpool team was. I want a memory of some sort of trophy, some sort of shiny thing that I can point to and say this Liverpool team was so good, and they have that thing to prove it. We know it's a fantastic team, but going into the future, when we look back on brilliant Liverpool sides, they've got a trophy to remember it by. You look back on the teams of the 80s, they've got the European Cups, they've got the division titles, they've got domestic doubles and stuff like that. You look back on even the Rafa Benitez team that wasn't that good, but still has an FA Cup and a Champions League to its name. That's elevated where it is in Liverpool history. And I think it would be an absolute tragedy if this team does not have, like I said, a shiny thing to show for its efforts in this season. And because of the unpredictability of the Premier League, because of the unpredictability and the sheer difficulty of the Champions League, I think for now at least, we've got to give the FA Cup a bit of a go. However, the timing of this game makes that very difficult because, like I said, the league campaign has certainly been taking centre stage over the last few months, and that has been obvious in terms of how Jurgen Klopp has picked his teams for the last few games. Normally around this December period, we do as much rotating as we possibly can. We rest players whenever we can, especially in games like, that one against Newcastle on Boxing Day. In the past, that would have been an ideal game to bring in your Sturridges, your Origis, your Lallanas, your, Morenos and Kleins and stuff like that. But Liverpool put out the best sides they possibly could because this league campaign is so important. And I think they did that with this game against Wolves in mind, knowing that if we just get through the December period, we've then got a week and a half or so where we've only got the game against Wolves. It's only the FA Cup and we can think about rotation. We can think about maybe bringing in a few players who haven't had that much game time and resting the ones who we really push to the absolute limit over the December period, because some players were playing absolutely non-stop. We were expecting them to get rests. Players like Robertson, like Alexander-Arnold, whenever he was fit, they got on the pitch whenever they possibly can. And I think that was done with this game in mind and with the ability to rest players for the FA Cup in mind. So team news going into the game with rotation very much at the forefront of the conversation about this match. Jurgen Klopp said in his press conference yesterday that he is going to make a fair few changes for this one. You know, he said he's essentially forced to do it, and that comes as no surprise because, like I said, we slogged our way through the December period, pushing all of our players to the absolute limit of their physical capabilities. So it's no surprise that he's now looking at his squad and thinking, you know what, we've got to make changes here. I think conversations will have been had with the sports scientists where they said you can push the players through December, but please, for the love of God, give them the Wolves game off in January. So he said that he will be making changes. There will be rotation. There are a couple of players who were confirmed to play for this game. One of those being Simon Mignolet. Now, there's a whole interesting conversation you can have about that one as well. I think it's partially a reward for the fact that Mignolet seems to have been reasonably professional, despite the fact he has lost his number one spot to Alisson, and he had a difficult season last season when he lost his number one spot to Loris Karius as well. I think it's quite important that we do keep our reserve goalkeeper happy. It's something that a lot of top teams are doing at the moment, and it's a way of ensuring that you do have a backup goalkeeper who is good enough to step in should there be an injury or a suspension to your first choice. City do it with Claudio Bravo, Man United do it with Sergio Romero, Arsenal have done it with Petr Cech. You know, any team that has got a half decent backup goalie will bring them in for the cups, and Liverpool should be no different, because if we want to keep Mignolet, or if we want to at least be an attractive prospect to a goalkeeper who maybe doesn't mind sitting on the bench but would at least like to play something and sees Liverpool as a decent club to play for, we've got to show that they will get chances in the domestic cups. So it's no surprise Mignolet starts, and you know, fingers crossed that just because it's a one-off game, not necessarily a one-off game, of course, if we go through to the final, and there is an even more important conversation to be had there over whether we keep him all the way or whether we do bring Alisson in for the most important games of the tournament. So I think Mignolet, yeah, obviously is starting this game. That's probably going to be fine. Apart from that, Jurgen Klopp mentioned a few other players in his press conference, one of which was Kylian Mbappé, who has obviously been thrust into the spotlight with the defensive injuries we had first of all in December, after we were left with only Lovren and Van Dijk as our fit and available centre-backs. And then the sale of Nathaniel Klein as well was apparently, well, not the sale, the loaning even, although I can't really see a huge future for him at the club anyway. But the moving on of Nathaniel Klein was apparently sanctioned by Jurgen Klopp with Kylian Mbappé in mind, with the idea that this player is capable of stepping in and doing a job for the club if need be, with Nathaniel Klein no longer available for us. So that's now another conversation that I think is being had at the club right now. Klopp said that nothing is really nailed on. It's entirely possible that he could make his debut, but as he said, if we hadn't had the injuries we had to the defenders earlier on in December, then Kylian Mbappé would still be playing with the under-23s. So he essentially said there's no reason why he wouldn't play, but at 16 years old, you've got to be cautious about these things, because it's a sink or swim situation throwing someone that young straight into the first team. And what you don't want to do is set their development back by a couple of years by them having an absolute horror show live on BBC One in front of millions and in front of, I'm sure, many more watching Liverpool around the world. So Mignolet definitely going to start. Kylian Mbappé a possibility. Apart from that, other injury news, Joe Gomez and Joel Matip were both mentioned by Jurgen Klopp in his press conference. He said that both of these players are getting closer to fitness. However, this game does come a little bit too soon, which is a shame, because it would have been a nice game, and obviously it would have been nice to have some extra options for rotation among the central defenders, but also it's a nice easy game, you'd think, to be able to ease them back in. You know, if you could just bring them on for the last half hour, with it being the FA Cup rather than a Premier League or Champions League game, you feel like it wouldn't be a huge problem, and they could maybe settle in there without too much pressure on them, so that they can then be put into Premier League situations. So bit of a shame, but you never know, maybe we make it through to the fourth round, or God forbid end up with a replay, and that's where they come in. But unfortunately this game has just come that tiny bit too soon for the pair of them. So as for how we're actually going to line up, this is a very difficult one to predict, of course, with all of the rotation that Liverpool are going to do, and also the fact that we are kind of restricted in terms of rotation in a few key areas on the pitch, because, you know, injuries to certain players, like the ones I've mentioned earlier, means that we are down to the bare bones of our squad in a few departments, and that's part of the reason why we've had to push players to the absolute limit over the December period. But as I said, Mignolet definitely starting in goal. No surprises there. Well, no surprises as soon as Jurgen Klopp confirmed it. We don't need to have any sort of argument or conversation about that. On to the centre-backs. I think this is where we're going to see the least rotation, simply because of the lack of players available. I think we're going to just have to go with Virgil van Dijk and Dejan Lovren as the two centre-backs. I think If everyone else had been fit, it would have been nailed on for Dejan Lovren, simply because I think once Joe Gomez comes back in, he'll get a little bit of a rest, so I'm not too worried about his fitness. I think we can push him that little bit further. Virgil van Dijk is obviously the one that I think everyone wants to see get a bit of a rest, because if he gets an injured, we're a little bit doomed in terms of the Premier League title challenge. But I just think with the sheer lack of options available, and also the fact that Van Dijk himself has said that he wants to play every game, and there is, after all, I think a 4-day gap between. They've had 3 days of rest, and then they've got another 4 days of rest before that game against Brighton at the weekend. So it's not like they're being pushed through an absolute horror schedule. It's nothing like we've seen in Christmas periods in the past. So I think Virgil van Dijk can maybe just be pushed through this one, and I think if you were to drop him, or at least rest him for this game and maybe bring him on as a substitute or something like that, I think you actually cause more problems than you solve, because with the lack of players we've got available, you're either bringing in someone from the under-23s or potentially even Kiana Huerva, because we know he can play centre-back as well as both full-back positions. Then you're actually doing more damage to them, because they're going to get targeted. Wolves will see them as the weakness in the back line, and if they have a bad game, if they struggle being targeted, then that can set their development back really, really far. So I think you've got to be careful with that, and like I said, playing Van Dijk is less of a risk than playing a youngster and potentially destroying their future career at Liverpool. And the only other move you can really make is putting Fabinho into the back line. But I think, again, you're messing with Fabinho a bit there, whereas I'd rather just keep playing him on in that midfield position and get him used to playing it by getting him in that sort of area of the pitch as much as is physically possible. So I think Lovren and Virgil van Dijk are your centre-backs for this game. The full-backs, I think, is where we do see a little bit of change. Left-back, I think this is a nailed-on Alberto Moreno game. Andrew Robertson, the guy's got to have a rest. He's been run into the ground. Let him go and see his wife and that baby that he's apparently had, but no one's entirely sure, because it all seemed to be sort of conjecture and rumours that was coming out on the day of the Man City game. Either way, let the guy have the night off. Same with Trent Alexander-Arnold. I think you have Albi on the left-hand side, and then I'd go with Rafa Camacho at right-back for this game. There are obviously shouts for James Milner, maybe Kiana Huerva as well. I think Milner is one where, you know, you keep hold of him and maybe play him further forward, or give him a little bit of a rest, because obviously he played against Man City. It was a very high tempo game and he'd only just come back from injury. So I'd maybe like to see him in the game against Brighton. So I'd rather see Rafa Camacho. He's one of those players who did well enough in pre-season to justify getting some minutes this season. And obviously he didn't play in that League Cup game against Chelsea. So he's going to have to get his minutes from somewhere, because like I said, his pre-season was good enough that he deserves it. So I think give him a chance in this game. And look, if it goes horribly wrong, you can always play Fabinho there. You can always play James Milner there. You can always potentially even bring Trent Alexander-Arnold on. So that is my back line. The midfield, I think we go with the 4-2-3-1 for this game. I think you go with Fabinho and Keita as a double pivot. I think Fabinho, just because he offers a bit of stability. He's obviously coming into his own in the side now, and also didn't play the full 90. He only came on as a sub against Manchester City, so he shouldn't be too tired. And then I also think with him acting as a sort of stable player in midfield, it allows us to get a good look at what Naby Keita will actually be like playing in the double pivot in the two behind the attacking players, because so far we've only ever seen him in a midfield three in the 4-3-3, or further ahead in the sort of the three that plays behind the striker in the 4-2-3-1. I don't think he fits playing that position in the 4-2-3-1. I think his best position is still in the 4-3-3, but with us not really wanting to use that formation that much at the moment, it's down to him to show that he can play some sort of position, some sort of role in the current formation that we're favouring. And I think while it's risky to play him in the 4-2-3-1 because we don't know how disciplined he is defensively, this is a great opportunity to test that out. And I think even if we weren't playing in there, he's got to start somewhere for this game, just because of the fact that he's not really getting any football elsewhere, and I think he needs to become an important player for us in the second half of the season. So I think Fabinho and Keita as the midfield double pivot. I think ahead of them, you've got to have Shaqiri at right mid. I think he's another player who's nailed on, having not started against Manchester City, but being such a good player that he deserves all the minutes he can get in this Liverpool side. I then think Adam Lallana, another player who's probably nailed on to start this game. Just, again, give him some minutes, rest a few other players. We know Klopp relies on him. We know Klopp knows what he's going to get out of Adam Lallana, and I think it'd be interesting to see how he would function in the number 10 role of the 4-2-3-1. And then out on the left, I think we should give a game to Curtis Jones, because again, it's a similar situation to the Rafa Camacho one, where he had such a good pre-season and he's had no opportunities so far this season. And while you can say that we're still keeping him at the club rather than loaning him out because Jurgen Klopp wants him to train with the first team to get a bit of experience there, I think he's going to have to get games somewhere, and this is the best possible opportunity. And especially if he's surrounded by other first team players as well, I think he thrives in that kind of situation. He thrives playing alongside better players because he can get the best out of them through his own talents, and he doesn't get phased by those kind of situations. It's what we saw in pre-season, and I'd love to see him bring it to a competitive match in the FA Cup. So I think because we've got other players that show our squad depth who can play this game, like Lallana, Shaqiri, Keita, and the forward who I will mention in a moment, I think we can get away with playing a few academy youngsters. So why not bring in a Camacho and why not bring in a Curtis Jones and just see what they can do? And then completing the starting 11, I think another player who's absolutely nailed on for this game is, of course, Daniel Sturridge. He needs a bit more football. He's been great for us so far this season. He's got really good at playing the system as well as just being a natural finisher that we know is a great weapon to have in our arsenal. And like I said, with him not playing too many minutes over the Christmas period, it's a fantastic player to be able to bring on and use your squad depth in this type of game. So taking a little look at Wolves then, and I say little because it's hard to really predict how they're going to set up for this game, because I do think they will rotate an awful lot. They'll be similar to Liverpool in that I think they're going to prioritise the league campaign. Now, normally a team in their position where they're far enough away from the relegation places but not quite close enough to be competing for Europe, you look at them and think the FA Cup is an ideal opportunity to have a bit of fun with their season, to let their hair down and cut loose and just see whether they can give their fans something to shout about. And I think if this was their second season in the league, they definitely give this more of a go. But just because it's their first season, I think they're going to want the security of staying far, far away from the relegation places, because it is possible for teams like them, especially teams with a small squad, to fall away a little bit in the second half of the season. And the small squad is the reason that I think they are going to be unpredictable, because they haven't got the depth to call upon like Liverpool. I think there are going to be a lot of players that they field that we're never going to have heard of because they don't have that much depth. In the Premier League, I think they've rotated less than any other team. So I think that gives me a lot of confidence going into the game. However, they do have, if there's one area they do have a little bit of depth, it is in that attacking department. You know, one thing they're good at this season is being able to bring on impact subs going forward. I'm thinking of players like Helder Costa, who we, of course, all know about because of the performance he put in against us a couple of seasons ago. I think he scored the second goal in that defeat against Wolves at Anfield in the 4th round. They've also got, I think, Diogo Jota, who hasn't played too many games through, I don't know if it's injury or suspension, but he certainly didn't play against us earlier on in December. They've got Adama Traore, who sometimes starts, sometimes comes off the bench. So they've certainly got players who can threaten us there. So I think the one thing that we can probably guarantee is they won't sit back. They will look to play front foot football, especially because this is also a free hit and Wolves have got the talent. They've got a coach who knows how to play attacking football, especially against a big side. So I don't think they're going to be cautious. I don't think they're going to sit like 5 men behind the ball at all times or anything like that. I think with the attacking depth that they've got and the fact that this game, you know, is a free hit for them, I think they will absolutely go for it, which could end badly for us because they could end up overrunning us and getting another upset against us. And that's another one of the reasons why I do just want to see Fabinho in the midfield, Van Dijk and Lovren as the centre-backs, just to avoid an embarrassing upset. Because while, again, if we're out of the FA Cup, it's not the end of the world. Although, as I said at the top of the video, I'd love some silverware to take away from this season. With the defeat against Man City, the last thing you want is another defeat, especially against a team like Wolves. No disrespect or anything, I do think they're a good side, but they're not really a team that we should be losing to. If we then lose 2 on the bounce, it suddenly becomes a thing. It becomes something that the press jump on and say, are Liverpool in crisis? Are Liverpool feeling the pressure? Are Liverpool struggling to get the best out of their fringe players in this difficult part of the season where the fixtures will start to pile on them? And so I think it's important that we just get out of this game with a win, regardless of what you think of the FA Cup, because the other alternative as well is a draw, is a replay, is another game we don't need, another game to clog up the fixture list where we're looking at Manchester City at the moment. We're looking at the fact that they have that 2-legged semi-final against, I think it's Burton Albion in the League Cup, and we're saying, Thank God we don't have that, and thank God they've got it, because that should give us an advantage. So the last thing we need is a replay. So no matter what your thoughts on the FA Cup, I think this is still a real, not a must-win game, but a game we shouldn't be looking to throw. And look, there's no one ever throws a game. Jurgen Klopp will never put our side out thinking, I honestly don't care about a result. But, you know, obviously there are games that you think if we lose, it's not the end of the world. I think this is one that it is important to win, because I'd love to see us make progress in the FA Cup. And of course, we do want to get back to winning ways after that game against Manchester City. So that is all for today's video. Thank you guys very, very much for watching. Let me know what you think of the FA Cup and how far you think we should try and go in the tournament this season down in the comments below. Apart from that, don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it. Hit that subscribe button there if you're new around here. Check out some of the other videos that have been out on the channel over the past few days as well. Don't forget to follow at LFC Focus TV on Twitter, and I'll be back on Monday night after we've hopefully booked our place in the FA Cup 4th round. Until then, bye for now.